I informed my wife, Emily, that my seminar ended a day earlier than planned. However, I couldn't change my flight, so I would be back on Tuesday night. Emily was frustrated about me being away for another night, but expressed her delight at seeing me. After thinking about it for an hour, I realized I had been away from home quite often and decided to prioritize my wife, whom I have shared 17 years of my life with. I made the decision to go to the airport and try to change something. Initially, I almost gave up, but then I noticed a flight to an airport near our hometown. It was a 2-hour journey to the south, a route I had never taken before. Without hesitation, I checked the available flights and found one leaving in just half an hour, so I quickly went to the counter and purchased a ticket. Surprisingly, the process was much easier than I expected. An hour later, I found myself in the air, and after 3 hours I landed. Renting a car, I estimated that I would reach home by midnight. I couldn't wait to see Emily's joyful expression at my early return. With a smile on my face and a list of assumptions in my mind, I decided not to call her and instead make my homecoming a complete surprise. As I arrived home just before midnight, I noticed that the house was dark and Emily's car was nowhere to be seen. I found it odd, but I didn't jump to conclusions. Carrying my bag inside, I unpacked while wondering where she could possibly be at such a late hour. Curiosity got the best of me, so I called her cell phone. She answered on the third ring, sounding a bit groggy. I greeted her, pretending to check on her well-being. To my surprise, she informed me that it was already past midnight and she had been asleep. Emily had assured me that she would be at the airport the next morning at 6 o'clock to pick me up. Confused and curious about her being asleep but not at home, I inquired about her whereabouts and mentioned my unsuccessful attempt to reach her on the home phone, which was apparently not working due to a scheduled repair. My head was spinning, wondering if she was upstairs in bed while I was unpacking in the same room without noticing her presence. I tried not to assume the worst, even though doubts lingered in my mind. I then decided to inform her that I wouldn't be on the 6 o'clock flight and would be staying a few more days. Promising to call her with the exact time and day of my return, she expressed her longing for my presence and urged me to come home as soon as I could. I assured her of my eagerness to see her and bid her goodbye. After ending the call, I couldn't help but notice a hint of laughter in Emily's voice. Curiosity struck again, and I dialed my home phone number, which surprisingly rang. Although my usual playful nature tempted me to answer and have a witty conversation with myself, I couldn't find it in my heart to do so. Instead, I went up to our room and began searching under the bed and in various hiding spots. At that moment, the realization hit me like a lightning bolt. It seemed that Elvis had left the building, leaving foolishness in his wake. Admitting my own foolishness, I woke up early the next morning and parked the rental car across the street. Around 7 o'clock, Emily's car pulled up to the house with a man behind the wheel. Determined to uncover the truth, I hid in the junk closet in the foyer, slightly opening the door. Emily unlocked the door, and they both entered. She informed him that she needed to change and get ready for work, mentioning the necessity of getting clothes for the next day to avoid returning in the morning. In a playful manner, she warned him about being late and playfully mentioned his enjoyment of being her superior at work. Emily also commented on his wife's perception of her as the ideal secretary, even though she found him obnoxious and arrogant. It dawned on me that he had only been with the company for a couple of weeks. With amusement in his voice, he mentioned that he had already informed his wife about Emily. He joked about their age difference and how his wife would surely want to fire Emily upon seeing her. He added that he had also informed his wife about his plans to house hunt that week and possibly spend a couple of days away from the hotel. Emily rejoined the conversation and they shared laughter and affection. She looked stunning, and her boss, who she referred to as Mr. Boss, embraced her, giving her a slow and passionate kiss. Suppressing the urge to voice my disapproval, I listened as he suggested that she spend the following night with him, going out for dinner and returning by 8 p.m. As a professional writer, I observed the unfolding events with a mix of emotions. The text accurately conveyed the protagonist's initial intentions of surprising his wife, but took an unexpected turn, revealing an affair between Emily and her boss. The narrative captured the protagonist's feelings of confusion, curiosity, and ultimately, the realization of his own foolishness. The story ended on a suspenseful note, leaving room for further development and exploration of the consequences faced by the characters involved. He mentioned the possibility of showing her the cottage after talking to the owner. Emily supported the idea and playfully asked what kind of tour he would like, adding, "What if my husband comes back earlier?" His name was Jeff. Jeff assured her, mentioning that he would call him to arrange a pickup from the airport, giving her a day's notice of arrival. He stressed that if he did not call today, he would not return home tomorrow. Emily found this satisfactory and replied, assuming that I was a roach and on the slightest occasion, I would probably offer Jeff a beer and apologize for the inconvenience. In turn, Jeff suggested that I sounded like a chatterbox and that his wife would be furious and might cause him trouble if he cheated on her. Emily said that fear makes most men obey, although it seemed to her that he was not very afraid of his wife most of the time. Jeff replied that he would get into big trouble if he changed, and would be able to save his life only out of pure luck. He added that his wife is in Houston, which makes it relatively safe. That's when I stopped listening. They left the room. I blushed, and I felt the pressure rise. Not only was my wife unfaithful, but she didn't seem to like me. I sat down to think about the situation, and slowly a plan began to take shape in my head. I remembered that Emily had mentioned that her new boss would be transferred from the company's main office in Houston. I needed to find out his name, so I made some calls. A few unobtrusive questions to the female receptionist at Emily's work quickly gave me all the information I needed. His name was Jeffrey Ross, and he had a wife and 2 teenage children. She stayed in Texas until the kids finished the school year, and then they would join Jeffrey in Springfield. He will look for a house every night after work. I searched for the last name Ross in the Houston Internet Directory and found 3 Jeff Ross in Houston. I was lucky with the first call. I asked if she was Mrs. Jeffrey Ross and she confirmed, asking how she could help me. I asked if her husband worked for Halifax, and she confirmed that he did. I came up with my identity, claiming to be Don Watson from Halifax, and mentioned that I was planning to throw a little party for her husband Jeff and her. I explained that they were going to get round-trip tickets to Springfield as a surprise for Jeff. She responded positively and asked about the date of the event. I refrained from giving a direct answer and instead informed that the event would take place the following evening. I provided the flight details and explained that the company would reimburse Jeff for the expenses. I stressed the need for secrecy, and she promised not to disclose the information to anyone. Then I started calling Emily's friends and family to invite them to her surprise party. I informed them that Emily had been promoted by her boss, which deserved to be celebrated. Everyone was happy with the explanation and the need to keep it a secret from Emily. I asked them to come to our house by 19 o'clock to ensure Emily's presence. To ensure a smooth party, I contacted a local restaurant and ordered food and drinks, indicating that they should be set up on the veranda next to the living room next to our pool. It was a special touch, as Emily had always wanted to party on this veranda. I left instructions for the caterers and explained that the house might be empty when they arrived, but they could set everything up on the outdoor veranda by going around the house. The next day, I arrived at the airport half an hour before the scheduled time. As the passengers were heading to the baggage claim area, I approached a couple of single women and asked if they were Mrs. Ross. While talking to one of the women, I heard someone address me. She introduced herself as Mrs. Ross and asked me to come get her. I was almost speechless when I saw her. She looked like a movie star. I introduced myself as Ron and explained that my wife works for her husband. I decided to act on the fly, as she seemed a little suspicious. I jokingly mentioned that I was often told that I had married an older and plump woman, but assured her that this was because my wife had more experience and needed to be loved more. She thought about it for a moment, and then she smiled, and I felt relieved. We picked up her luggage and headed to the car. When we arrived at my house at 6:30 p.m., I explained to Mrs. Ross that it was an open party in honor of her husband and also a celebration in honor of my wife's birthday. When the guests started coming, the caterer finished the preparation, and I was honestly impressed. It looked like an upper-class party, and I didn't expect that everything could be organized so smoothly. By 19:30, all the guests were in their places. By 7:30, all the guests I had invited had arrived and were in position. I instructed everyone to park their cars behind the church half a block away so that our driveway would remain clear. I explained to them my plan to hide in the living room and turn off the patio lights when the guests of honor arrived at the house. This would be the signal for everyone to be quiet. Our sliding glass doors led to the veranda, and we had vertical blinds that could be adjusted with cords. One cord opened the blinds horizontally, while another separated them. In addition to that, we had thick curtains that we normally use during cold weather. These curtains were large enough for me to hide behind as I reached for the cords of the vertical blinds and a light switch on the veranda. A few minutes before 8 o'clock, I spotted Emily's car pulling up in front of the house. I switched off the lights on the deck and concealed myself behind the curtains to create a serene atmosphere. The door opened, and the sound of Emily and Jeff's laughter filled the air. I couldn't help but feel reassured knowing that they were enjoying themselves. Jeff, in a playful manner, expressed his eagerness for some alone time, mentioning how rare it was for them to have a moment together. He helped Emily remove her dress, revealing that she was wearing only a thong. They both seemed to be in high spirits as Emily playfully removed her thong. She mentioned Jeff's constant playfulness, and he gently pushed her onto my chair, signaling the start of their intimate encounter. Carefully, I turned on the light. Emily was taken aback and demanded an explanation for my presence. Her question seemed somewhat simplistic given the circumstances. I calmly reminded her that this was my house, emphasizing that my name was on the deed. She expressed surprise at my early return, and I casually acknowledged it. Jeff mumbled something about needing to leave and having other matters to attend to. To their surprise, I offered him a drink. I could see that Jeff was contemplating Emily's earlier assumption that I would offer him a beer if I caught them together. I couldn't help but smile as I observed his thought process. Before he could respond, his wife suddenly entered the room from the veranda, clutching a large purse and waving it around furiously. Jeff's surprise left him virtually defenseless, and he ended up about 5 feet away from where he was previously standing. Shortly after, Emily's mother and sister joined the scene. Emily, still undressed, received a scolding from her mother, who told her to get dressed and jokingly suggested she consider a career in adult entertainment based on her recent performance. Emily was too shocked to respond, and when I turned on the porch light, she realized that 20 other people were witnessing the scene. I went outside, grabbed some potato salad and wings, and fetched a can of beer from the refrigerator. Returning to my seat, I observed Jeff struggling to sit down and Emily attempting to regain her composure. The whole situation was undeniably frustrating, and I couldn't help but think that I wasn't the one responsible for this mess. Emily and Jeff had put themselves and their loved ones in this uncomfortable situation. Ultimately, it was better for everyone to know the truth and move forward. As time passed, the situation calmed down. Emily's cousin took Mrs. Ross to a motel, while another cousin assisted Jeff to the car and provided him with a ride to the same motel. Emily's mother asked if Emily wanted to go with them, but she declined. Her mother understood that I was likely upset and acknowledged that Emily deserved a good scolding, but believed she had suffered enough. Then they left. Emily retreated to the bathroom, and I heard the sound of the shower running. I've never enjoyed beer and wings so much. Sitting alone and reflecting on the evening's events, I thought to myself that once or twice in life, everything aligns perfectly and the plan actually works. After finishing the salad and wings, I began cleaning up. Clearing up after this crowd took quite a bit of time. I had to store the leftovers in the refrigerator and freezer. It was past midnight when I sat down at the table with the last beer of the evening, finally able to relax. Emily entered the room and took a seat across from me. I asked her if she was happy and if that's what she wanted. I pondered why people began forming such opinions and questioned whether I had done anything to give them that impression, even suggesting that it might have been her doing. She mentioned the incident when I was caught with my boss and wondered if anyone would think that's what promiscuous women do. Emily expressed her frustration with me for not discussing any problems with her instead of inviting the whole neighborhood over. I grinned and asked her if we had a problem. She continued by explaining that she never intended to be rude to me and that she never thought I would find out about my boss. She accused me of intentionally hurting her. I pointed out that having a surprise party for my beloved wife at home couldn't be worse than cheating outside of marriage. I assumed that few would agree with her point of view. Finally, she said what I had been waiting to hear for so long. Emily explained that if I had been around more, none of this would have happened. She claimed that I didn't pay enough attention to her, which made her vulnerable to Jeff. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. She tried to blame me and make me apologize for my own actions. She seemed so stupid in front of me. When I locked the bedroom door behind me, a deep sense of satisfaction enveloped me. My chains were broken. I was emotionally liberated and will soon be legally free. Okay, that was a funny story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Sitting at the kitchen table, I am surprisingly calm, enjoying a cup of freshly brewed coffee. I needed it to calm my nerves. I've always found it a very soothing routine. I did this regularly when our children were young. I woke up an hour before everyone else to enjoy the peace and quiet. It was kind of a hobby for me. My name is Ivan Johnson, to be precise. I've been happily married for 25 years. Okay, I was happily married until a few hours ago. We have 4 children, and the last one left a year ago. My wife seemed to have a hard time coping with what she called empty nest syndrome, I think. So I encouraged her to find a hobby. She must have found it an hour ago. I didn't know his name. She just kept calling him Stud and encouraging him with phrases like, "Do it, Stud. Come on, baby. I know you can do it." It was strange that the aroma of my favorite coffee filled the house. Their activities were not disturbed. Usually, when I was making coffee, my wife Bob would rush downstairs even before it was ready. However, Bob seemed too engrossed, which perhaps explained why she hadn't smelled the coffee yet. There were even more words between them. She asked him to tell her how much better he was than her weak husband, and he replied, "Oh my God, you're much better." I decided to activate the safety on my weapon, deciding that this was a cautious step just in case. After all, her boyfriend was a policeman. How did I know about this? Because when I came home earlier, his uniform and equipment belt were scattered on the floor of my living room, along with all my wife's clothes. Against the background of their passionate exchange of words, it was difficult to concentrate on their task. I couldn't say for sure how much time I had, but judging by the length of their actions in what used to be my bedroom, a place I wasn't going to visit anymore, it seemed like I had enough time. It was clear to me that this was not their first meeting, as I had accidentally overheard my wife expressing a desire to have sexual intercourse with him more often. "Damn it, baby. We need to find a way to meet 2 or 3 times a week, not just occasionally." These words came from my beloved wife, or at least that's what I think. How did I get involved in this nightmare? Very stupid. I went to work and forgot my briefcase. No, I actually left it in the garage because I put it there to save a cat that was hiding under the hood of my car and forgot about the briefcase. Tabby was our second cat. One cold winter morning many years ago, I forgot to tap on the hood before starting the car. And that was the end of Clarence, our first cat. There is nothing like the sound a cat makes when it hits a fan belt that rotates at about 1,000 revolutions per minute. Not to mention all those flying furs around. Clarence wasn't smart enough, and I don't think I was either. You will never let that weakling you call your husband touch you again. No, he won't hurt me anymore, I swear. My briefcase wasn't that important, so I was going to keep it. But I had to visit a client who drove me straight to my house. Great. Anyway, I turned onto my street and immediately saw a black and white police car parked in front of him. It felt like someone had plunged a knife into my heart. I assumed that something terrible had happened to my devoted wife. I drove into the driveway and almost hit my wife's new silver Lexus LS. The place where her plaster garden gnome was located did not turn out to be so successful. I didn't even close the door and burst into the house. That's how I ended up here, drinking coffee. Take me now, boy. Made me feel good. Oh my God, I've never felt anything so beautiful. It was very unpleasant, and I really wanted whiskey instead of coffee, but I realized that I still needed to keep my mind clear. I had to admit that their passionate screams were very embarrassing, and seeing it was even worse. But I had to see it, at least to record the necessary video and audio. Honestly, the way they rolled on my bed wasn't the most amazing part. The most unpleasant part was the verbal humiliation my wife was showering on me. "Oh my God, you're so much better than Ivan. Give it to me, baby." All that. Apparently, this greatly ecstatic her lover, as the whole house began to shake along with the bed, and his swearing and moaning exceeded several decibels. Let me tell you, it's a shock when your wife sleeps with her lover in your family bed. And yes, they did it on my side. My wife wrote to him breathlessly, using comparisons with a cowboy and telling her lover how it turns her on. That's when I ran into the bathroom, bent over the toilet, and tore out all my breakfasts. I was surprised that they didn't hear or smell it. I assumed they were deep in their studies. Part of me found it hard to believe, even after I had seen and heard enough to convince the jury of what was going on. But my wife was 50 years old, and the guy she was sleeping with couldn't have been older than 30. He was in great shape, and my wife was not his equal. I may not be macho, but damn it, why go to another man's wife if she's in shape? It just doesn't make sense. It seemed like it took forever, but after about 90 minutes, it suddenly became very quiet. I guess they decided to take a break. Then I heard my wife ask, "What is that smell?" Her boyfriend didn't answer. I just heard her scream, "Oh my God." There was a lot of noise, cupboard doors opening and closing, dresser drawers, and laundry baskets. I assumed they were cleaning up all the evidence of their affair. I made a psychological note to check myself for sexually transmitted diseases. They saw me at the same time, and Bob screamed because, well, I was here, and her lover did the same thing. He looked at his uniform and seemed dejected. "She's not here, man." "What?" "Your uniform weapon. Your boss took it with him when he left. An attentive guy. He almost started to disappear right in front of my eyes, and then I saw his lips tremble in despair. He fell to his knees, losing the sheet in the process, and desperately searched among the things lying on the floor. He took that too. I think he called it your throwing hand. I think he was really upset that the serial number was deleted. That means 5 to 7 years. Former Officer Stead Johnson looked crushed by this discovery. Like I said, he's a caring guy. We had a good conversation while you two lovers were doing your business upstairs. Bob glanced quickly out the window at the street. Yes, he also took a patrol car. Your boss said you were providing security at the construction site. He wanted to take the uniform too, but decided that you might need it when you leave this place. But where am I staying? You can call your wife to give you a ride home, but probably not. She's too upset about this video. I emailed it to her. It was hard to understand what she was saying, but it was about her father, probably not. She was too upset about the video. I emailed it to her. She wasn't screaming at this stage. It was more like a sad moaning, like a lonely dog howling at the moon. Well, officer, I think it's time for you to put on your uniform and leave. So he did. After you left, my wife finally returned the speech. Please, Evan, I love you. It didn't mean anything. It was just a romantic affair or something. God, I wish you'd told me that sooner. I was worried that you loved him and were going to divorce me. Now I'm ashamed of my overaction, right? Because you know that I love you. Of course I love you, Ivan. Why do you doubt it? Well, besides the whole cheating trick, having sex with your mistress on my bed and calling me a stupid idiot covered in paint, there were a few other signs. Honey, I didn't really do that. It was just bedtime conversations to warm up the atmosphere. Wait, you said you overplayed it. Ivan, what did you do? She looked annoyed. Ivan, what did you do? She had seemed in shock before, but now she was clearly nervous and listening intently. Well, I'm sorry, but when I thought you didn't love me anymore, I sent the video to our kids. I just wanted them to see who their new dad would be. I guess I'll have to wait a bit before you call them. For some reason, they were offended. I thought they'd be happy for you. Well, that's what I did. Oh my God, you didn't do that. I just nodded. I forgot to mention one more thing, but you probably already know that your lover's wife works for the same company as you. I think she mentioned that she is an executive assistant to the CEO. Don't worry, I asked her not to fire you because you're going to need a job anyway, even if you get transferred to Little Rock. When I talked to my lawyer, she said that since you earn more money than me, you will pay me alimony for several years. She thinks it will be about $3,000 a month. I know that many deceived husbands refuse to accept it, like Macho, but I won't be like that. I plan to take a short break from work and go on a long fishing vacation to overcome my pain. That's how the song goes, fishing with the Senorita High Seas in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm not really sure why the lawyer asked for a picture of you. She mentioned something about giving it to your father, but maybe it was to have it on hand in case any officers wanted to do nasty things. Or maybe it was to see if anyone else was interested in getting to know you. However, I provided her with a photo. I also shared a copy of the video with your parents and colleagues. Why were you so tough, Ivan? Well, honey, I wasn't trying to be tough. I just wanted everyone to know who your new partner is. Your Facebook friends seemed happy for you. At that moment, Bob almost closed up. She was sitting on the floor, wrapped in sheets, crying, shaking her head and whispering, "This can't be happening to me." Okay, honey, it's time to get dressed and get your bag ready. Your parents will be coming for you soon. Pick me up? Well, of course, you need a place to stay. The house would have to be sold as part of the divorce, I told her later. A divorce? You seem to have some questions, dear. This surprises me. What did you expect when I found out about it? Well, you probably didn't expect me to get caught. Should we continue this pointless conversation? It was quiet upstairs for a few minutes. She didn't utter a word, except for the occasional moan and sob. Why do cheaters always cry when they get caught? A terrible thing. If being caught is so unpleasant, then please don't cheat in the first place. About 10 minutes later, she came downstairs, dressed, but without a suitcase. Ivan, dear, we are. Then I heard her parents' car stopping in front of our house. Goodbye, Bob. As always, I held the door for her, being a gentleman. Okay, that was a funny story. Now let's move on to another fascinating one. Stay in touch and let's dive into it. This evening did not go as expected. The house was grimly silent, and I couldn't find my wife, Helen, or our children. I, Mike Lewis, have been married to Helen for 11 years. When I realized it was quiet, I noticed a note on the table. Mike, I'm sorry I can't tell you this in person, but I'm too cowardly to meet you. I met someone else and fell in love. The children are with me and safe. The divorce papers are in the envelope under this note. As you can see, I'm not asking for anything, Helen. Naturally, my day and my life collapsed instantly. I walked around the kitchen, cursed, looked at the divorce papers, and finally sat down on a chair. Helen left me the house and all our money, taking only clothes for herself and the children, as well as their toys. The most annoying part was the last requirement. Helen wanted me to sign the adoption papers for my children, allowing her new partner to adopt them. It seemed that everything was settled. At least now I knew who she had dumped me for, Henry Carslake. I decided to call my future ex-wife. I greeted her briefly. "Hello, Helen," she answered simply. "Hi, Mike." I continued to ask about her situation by asking, "What's going on?" Helen explained that she met someone else and fell in love with him, as she mentioned in the note. I replied skeptically, expressing my doubts. "Yes, of course, you really fell in love. No one just leaves a marriage and sleeps with a guy. I just hope it wasn't in our bed." Helen requested that I refrain from swearing and act civilized. After taking a shower and changing my clothes, I went out to eat since cooking wasn't appealing in my mood. The food was decent, so I decided to head to a bar and have a couple of drinks. After the day I had endured, I felt like I was owed that much. The man Helen left me for was the owner of Carslake Construction Company. I had done some work for his company in the past, but that was about to change. My friend Paul spotted me at the bar and commented on my rare appearance, asking if I had managed to get away from my family for the evening. I replied that it was something like that and explained that I had returned to an empty house with a packet of divorce papers. Paul expressed his surprise upon learning that Helen was divorcing me and commented that he didn't see it coming. I echoed his sentiment, saying that I was equally taken aback by the turn of events. I mentioned that she had moved in with Henry Carslake, and Paul was astonished, asking if it was the same Henry of Carslake Construction. I confirmed that it was indeed the same person and shared my suspicion that she was in love with him. Paul inquired about my plans, and I declared that I was going to give her a divorce since she didn't want anything from me. I explained that there was another form she wanted me to sign, but I had already discarded it. Curious, Paul asked about the nature of that form, and I explained that she wanted me to give the kids to him for adoption, emphasizing that it was not going to happen. Paul shook his head in disgust and made a remark about Carslake, to which I added defiantly that I had been scheduled to start working for him on Monday, but had decided to find another job instead. In the end, I signed the divorce papers, despite Helen's attempts to persuade me otherwise, and she eventually gave up. When the divorce was finalized, Chloe was 10 and Lee was 8. I wanted to get back at Carslake, but I didn't want to land in jail for it. I never showed up for work on Monday, and strangely, no one seemed to press me about it. Part of my revenge on Carslake occurred without my involvement. It stemmed from my conversation with Paul. Word got out and most local contractors refused to work with Carslake Construction. They saw how he had treated me, so they refused his projects. While Henry found other contractors, they were subpar, and the work quality suffered. After 6 months, my divorce became official. 3 months later, Helen and Gobnyuk got married. I took care of the kids for a week while they went on their honeymoon. I didn't do it to help them. I just figured a week was better than the limited time I had on weekends. What bothered me was my daughter, Chloe's question. Had on weekends. What bothered me was my daughter, Chloe's question. "Daddy, why did you send us to live with Mom and Henry?" "What? I didn't send you. Your mother took you because she doesn't love me anymore. If it was up to me, you could have stayed here." I responded, clarifying that it wasn't my choice and that I planned to discuss it with Helen. When Helen arrived to pick up the kids, she seemed tanned and cheerful. I told Helen to stop lying and urged her to tell the kids the truth. I warned her that if she didn't, I would. I mentioned that the kids knew I didn't ask her to take them in and that I'd fight for custody if I could. Helen walked away in frustration. Life as a single man felt strange after being married for so long. Some friends tried to set me up on dates, but I didn't feel like dating. I wanted love, but wasn't in the mood for dating. Little did I know that my life was about to change. My neighbors were Gary and Emily, who had moved in just after Helen left. Their house was a good deal for them, but needed a lot of work. Emily worked as a secretary, and Gary was a retired army man. We got along well, and they seemed like a nice couple. Whenever we crossed paths, we had friendly conversations. Tragedy struck when Gary had a sudden health crisis at work. Paramedics and a doctor arrived quickly, but Gary was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy revealed he had died from a subdural hematoma. Emily was left in distress and alone. I offered her my sympathy, and since her parents were on vacation, I walked her home and poured us drinks. I listened to her as she sobbed and shared her future plans. Emily cried and fell asleep on my couch. I covered her with a blanket and slept in a chair in case she woke up during the night. The next morning, as Emily was leaving, Helen was dropping off the kids. "Good to see you're not wasting any time." "Mike, come on, Helen. The poor woman just lost her husband." Helen glanced at me, then turned to talk to the kids. Later that day, I explained to them why Emily was leaving the house. Chloe seemed sad, and I don't think Lee fully understood. Emily later invited me to attend Gary's funeral, which I did. Thankfully, in the UK, mortgages are insured, so Emily wouldn't be left destitute. This was little comfort given her loss. Emily's parents returned from Europe and spoke to me. After the funeral, I assured them that I would look out for Emily since, apart from my co-workers, I was her only friend. I offered to help with minor household tasks to keep her place in a livable condition. The next time Helen picked up the kids, she remained in the car, which was fine with me since I had no desire to talk to her. Emily and I spent a fair amount of time together, not as a couple, but as friends supporting each other. About a year later, I heard Lee chatting with Emily in the garden. I called out to him, asking him not to be a pest, but Emily said it was okay as she hung laundry on the clothesline. I suggested to Emily if she would like to have dinner with us that night. Lee wanted Emily to join us, and we all shared a laugh. After dinner, Emily helped me prepare dinner, and it was clear she was skilled in the kitchen. After dinner, she assisted with the cleanup and sat with us for a while before heading home. I thanked Emily for dinner and for accepting the invitation as she left. Chloe asked me with a smile if Emily was my girlfriend. I replied to Chloe that Emily was just a friend and neighbor, though secretly I thought it would be nice if she were my girlfriend. I kept that to myself, away from the kids. On a Sunday afternoon, Helen picked up the kids. I knew they would tell her about Emily joining us for dinner, and I was right. The next time Helen came to get the kids, she was particularly interested in Emily. I told Helen that Emily was just a friend, and that what I did was none of her business. Helen mentioned that she didn't get everything she wanted. I retorted that she left me for a life of luxury with him and that he could have his own kids if he wanted them. I expressed my strong opposition to him adopting our children, emphasizing how he had taken my wife and ruined our marriage. Helen pouted and walked home, but I smiled knowing I had upset her. A year later, I hadn't seen Emily for a few weeks, partly because I was very busy. My friend Paul was rewiring a house for a young couple and asked me to make an offer on a complete plumbing rewire. My offer was accepted, and I had a busy few weeks getting everything finished. While working on the house with Paul, he kept me up to date with news about Cars Lake. He still had to use a lot of non-local professionals since most of the local guys refused to work for him. With the work on the house completed, I finally had some time to relax. I decided to take Emily out to dinner. She agreed, and we set a time for Saturday night. When I walked in behind Emily, it took my breath away. She was a petite woman with a pixie cut hairstyle. The dress she wore accentuated her slim figure, and for the first time, I started to feel attracted to her. Dinner went well, and we spent a lot of time discussing our lives. Later that evening, I walked Emily to her door, and she expressed her gratitude for a wonderful evening. I smiled in response, and before I could reply, she surprised me with a passionate kiss that left me breathless. Afterward, she suggested that we go out again to see where things might lead and bid me good night, kissing me on the cheek this time. We did go out again, and this time it led to us spending the night together. Despite her small stature, Emily was incredibly passionate, and it was a thoroughly satisfying experience. As Emily and I spent more time together, she eventually sold her house and moved in with me. The kids were pleased with my dating life, and it was clear that they would inform Helen, who wasn't thrilled about it. She didn't want me, but Emily did. A year after our first intimate encounter, Emily and I got married. When the kids informed Helen, she simply snorted and turned away. Emily and I went on to have 2 children of our own, Gary and Robert. My older children were now old enough to visit on their own, which reduced my contact with Helen. Years passed, and one day, Chloe announced her engagement. Her boyfriend Josh had proposed the night before. As her father, I offered to help with the wedding expenses. Chloe explained that they initially thought they wouldn't need financial assistance, but Henry had offered to cover the costs with the condition that he would walk her down the aisle. Chloe refused, and Henry withdrew his financial support, leaving her upset. I was frustrated with Carslake for his actions, and Emily suggested using the money from the sale of her house to cover the expenses. I hesitated, considering it was her money, but she insisted and encouraged me to inform Chloe that we would cover the costs. Chloe was overjoyed when I shared the news, and we established a budget that accommodated everything they wanted for the wedding while staying under budget. The following day, Chloe informed me that Henry was furious, and Helen was clearly unhappy. One afternoon, Lee showed up unannounced in our garden, wanting to leave home because he was tired of hearing his mother and Henry argue. In our garden, wanting to leave home because he was tired of hearing his mother and Henry argue. Emily asked if they were still arguing about the wedding, but Lee revealed it was something else. He mentioned overhearing their intimate moments and suggested that Henry wasn't performing well in bed. We shared a laugh about the situation, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction that Helen had left me for someone who couldn't fulfill his responsibilities when it mattered. Lee decided to stay the night at our house to avoid any conflicts at home. On Chloe and Josh's wedding day, Helen didn't seem pleased. Chloe told her that she and Henry would sit behind Emily and me during the ceremony. The church service went smoothly. I agreed to have Helen sit at the top table at the reception. Meanwhile, Henry sat with Emily, Robert, Gary, and Lee. After all the speeches, the caterers removed a few tables to make space for dancing. Josh and Chloe led the first dance, and Emily and I joined them, along with Helen and Henry. Later, we found ourselves at the bar, and Gary and Robert were sitting with one of Chloe's bridesmaids and her children. Lee asked Emily if she wanted to dance, and I encouraged him to go for it. Helen took the opportunity to approach me, clearly having had a few drinks, and I had a sense that this encounter might not end well. She began commenting on Emily and me, remarking how young Emily looked and how she hadn't aged, despite being the mother of 2 boys. Helen then went on to criticize Emily's appearance, mentioning her weight and attire. I reminded her that we were divorced, and she no longer had the right to comment on my life. Helen continued to make derogatory remarks about Emily, and I defended my wife, telling Helen that Emily was more of a woman than she ever was. I'd even hinted at my satisfying, intimate life with Emily. Helen was left stunned as Henry joined the conversation. I pointed out to Helen that when she left me, she thought she was trading up for something better, and maybe she was or wasn't, but I had moved on. I had my own life, a loving wife, and 4 wonderful children. I walked away, leaving Helen and Henry to their own devices. Emily and I danced to slow music, and as we danced, she asked me about the exchange at the bar. I told her to kiss me, promising to explain later. We shared a kiss, knowing that Helen was watching. After breaking the kiss, I smiled at Helen, who turned away to order another drink. As I looked at Helen, who turned away to order another drink. As I looked at Emily, I couldn't help but think that I had indeed traded up for something better in my life.